Did you know there were once more than 50 all-black towns thriving across America, and that most Americans have never even heard of them? Today, we're diving into the astonishing history of black towns in the United States, communities built from the ground up, then nearly wiped off the map by violence, prejudice, and time. If you think you already know American history, think again. Hey everyone, welcome back to Factual America, the channel where we dig up the stories you were never taught in school. I'm glad you're here, because today's episode is one that every American needs to hear. We're about to uncover the hidden legacy of black towns in America, a chapter of our history that's been ignored, misunderstood, and in some cases, deliberately erased. If you're curious about the real stories that shape this country, you'll want to stick around. So, let's set the stage. After the Civil War, formerly enslaved people faced an impossible situation. The promise of 40 acres and a mule faded into empty words, and the hope for real freedom often ran into more violence and discrimination. But some black Americans took matters into their own hands. All across the South, Midwest, and West, thousands pooled their resources to build entire towns from scratch, places where they could finally own land, govern themselves, and imagine a future on their own terms. Let's talk about one of the most famous, Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, better known as Black Wall Street. By the early 1920s, Greenwood had everything: banks, movie theaters, restaurants, luxury shops, even its own newspaper. It was considered one of the wealthiest black communities in America. But what most people don't know is that Greenwood was just one of dozens of these towns. Take Mound Bayou, Mississippi, for example, a fully black-run town founded in 1887 that had its own hospital, schools, and businesses. Or Nicodemus, Kansas, a pioneer settlement that pulled off the unthinkable. They built a town in the middle of the prairie and survived drought, poverty, and the odds stacked against them. Why did black Americans build these towns? It wasn't just about escaping racism. It was about building true independence and dignity. Even when white communities nearby tried to sabotage them, these towns thrived. Imagine what life must have been like. Black doctors, teachers, farmers, carpenters, each playing their part, without the constant fear of discrimination controlling every move. But here comes the twist. Despite their success, these towns became targets. You've probably heard about the horror of the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. Over 2 brutal days, mobs destroyed 35 city blocks of Greenwood, leaving hundreds dead and thousands homeless. Just as chilling, this kind of violence wasn't rare. Across Florida, the town of Rosewood suffered a similar fate in 1923. In Texas, black residents of places like Freedmanstown in Houston faced legal and economic pressures. Entire neighborhoods were bulldozed to make way for highways or new developments. If you look at the reasons these towns vanished, it wasn't just violence. Some were erased by policy. When railroads skipped black towns, or when dams and highways were built coincidentally right through their neighborhoods. Others faded because of the Great Migration, when black Americans left the rural South seeking better lives in northern cities, chased by the threat of Jim Crow and lynching. But here's a unique wrinkle. A few black towns survived and even flourished. Eatonville, Florida, for example, is still around today. It claims to be the oldest black incorporated municipality in the United States. And Nicodemus, Kansas, you can actually visit it. Though only a handful of residents remain, the town stands as a National Historic Site. So why don't we learn about black towns in school? Part of it was shame. Part of it was deliberate erasure. After all, these stories challenged the myth that black Americans were simply victims rather than architects of their own destiny. And sometimes it was just that the records weren't preserved. When residents scattered, their accomplishments often went unrecorded. Let's get real for a second. Why does this all matter now? Because when you erase a people's history, you erase their hopes for the future. Imagine if Greenwood hadn't been burned to the ground. How many more black entrepreneurs, doctors, and teachers would have been inspired by its example? What kind of country would we be if these legacies had been celebrated instead of destroyed? And it's not all in the past. Descendants of black towns are working today to reclaim this history. Groups are restoring historical markers, holding festivals, even fighting for reparations. If you've ever felt frustrated that history only tells part of the story, you're not alone, and you have the power to help change that. So, let's open things up. Have you ever heard of any black towns in America before today? Do you think America would be different if these towns had been preserved? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if you know another hidden piece of U.S. history, I want to hear about it. If you enjoyed this dive into forgotten American history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Factual America for more untold stories. Believe me, there's so much more to discover together. And if you want to support this kind of content, sharing this video with a friend goes a long way. If we want to understand America, we have to look beyond the headlines, even beyond what's left standing. We need to remember what was erased. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, where the real history lives on.